Welcome to Adjusted Reality, a podcast series trusted by the adjusted and brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress, where we learn from athletes, celebrities, influencers, and healthcare professionals about how to optimize health in a fun, relatable way. Join me, Dr. Sherry McAllister, as we welcome an impressive bareback rider, Matt Lait. Matt is a 10-time Canadian Finals bareback qualifier, Canadian champion bareback rider, 2-time Canadian Finals average winner, and a bareback riding instructor for future generations. It is an absolute pleasure to have you on with me today, Matt.
Hi.
All right, so we have a lot of questions for bareback riders, and many of the people listening, they probably have seen the sport, but they don't know a lot about it. So first, I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get into bareback riding?
Oh, yeah, that's pretty easy. I grew up in southern Alberta, in the prairies of southern Alberta. There's now that I'm older, I guess, more older, I would say, there was a really good group of us kids that grew up together and all like got into rodeo kind of together and all stayed in rodeo and we've all, for the majority, I think we're all retired from rodeo now, but have stayed like in amongst the rodeo scene and at some point. But a lot of us, when I really look at it, we're very, accomplished in Canadian standards, right? And have really, I think, supported rodeo as a whole, as we are. But I got into it. My best friend growing up, I was a first generation cowboy, rodeo cowboy, I guess you'd say. My family were ranchers down home, but my best friend was they wrote him and his parents rodeoed, and just hanging out with him, that was, I would like to say, my first taste of it was getting on a Holstein steer in their arena. And then from then on, I rode steers, but you probably can't see it now, but as a young guy, I was really tall and really skinny, like 6 foot 130, 140. Like, so once my steer riding career, I guess you'd call it, when you were young, ended at the age of 14, I knew myself I wasn't physically probably able to move on to a different sport. So I started fighting, being a bullfighter, which is, lots of people don't know, but the close friends of mine know. And I did that until I was about almost 17 years old. And I played a lot of sports up here in Canada. We never had a football team, but I played volleyball, like any sport you could think of. Obviously, in Canadian, you play hockey. You always play hockey. But once I, like I said, I started fighting bulls, and
Okay,
then
let's go back there for a second because I want the audience to know what that actually means. Like you're not injuring the animal. Tell me exactly what would make one want to be in a ring with a bull. And second, why do they call it bullfighting? So
oh
start
yeah,
there.
great question. Yeah, you're really in North American standards, like obviously in Spain, a bullfighter is the matador or whatever, but in Canadian standards, you're in the arena with the bull riders. And if you've watched the BBR or any bull riding at a PRCA rodeo, once the bull rider gets bucked off, you essentially are their lifeline. So you're right. I don't know. And it was the hardest darn thing I've ever done, because your natural instinct is to really run away from a bull. And when a guy falls off, you have to run in between the cowboy and the bull. And if by chance you have to take a hit or whatever, and I tell you what, it was really hard to do. And that, you want to talk about fear and overcoming, like, just natural instinct, is training your mind to be like, I'm gonna go save this guy from complete danger. Like,
Okay,
so
I want to stop right there because there really is an adjusted reality moment happening right now. Adjust your reality to you're running towards the bull. Okay. As the audience is listening right now, contemplate you're there to save a life and you're running towards the bull. So this means that you're not only a lifesaver, you're going against every grain of your natural existence is to run from something is going to kill you. So
Well,
tell us in the short time that you were in the ring with the bull, how did you adopt the mental fortitude to know you were going to be okay?
yeah, that's a huge thing in anybody's life. But with that, you just have to want to do it enough and realize, I guess you're almost putting yourself below somebody almost, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
okay, I'll step in here and do this for you. Yeah, don't kid yourself. You're that's like one of the few jobs in rodeo that you actually have a guaranteed paycheck. And say to this day, they don't get paid enough.
Oh,
Like,
it's like a firefighter, right? You're going
oh,
against the grain. You're running into a fire. You're running into a bull, and the bulls are not only aggressive; they have a tremendous weight and a very sharp, two-piercing horns that easily can pierce through an entire human, and
well,
no one wants to get that.
oh, people don't realize the strength of animals. They are, when they're like, oh, this is a 1,400-pound horse or a 2,000-pound bull. Like, having been around livestock now and done the sport that I've done, I have such an appreciation for the absolute strength those animals and athleticism that they have. And they're so, I like to say I'm do a lot in nature and everything now, but like, yeah, it's amazing their power and how smart they are. And so anyways, back to the rodeo
Take
part.
us back out. You're outside of the bull riding now. What
Yeah, and
takes you from bullfighting into this incredible bareback race or
yeah.
barrel?
So as a guy in sports, I worked my butt off to like just gain strength because I knew I wanted to be a bareback rider. So when I was younger, like in those years when I was fighting bulls, I was in the gym. I was obviously still playing sports, but I worked my butt off and just knew that I had to be stronger, and that was really what I started doing, was building strength. And then I was almost 17 years old and I got on my first bucking horse. And luckily, I don't know, I've been told I'm a natural athlete, but don't get me wrong, I think people that pick up sports easily just, I was just lucky. I could see something and then kind of just figure it out. Like
Mhm.
I've always said it, and that's me in probably all my life. It's a good attribute, but sometimes it's a bad attribute because I'll maybe not ask questions. I'll just try it.
Right.
So really, I started getting on bucking horses and learned it quite quickly. So by the
So just a quick ask, your first bucking horse,
yeah.
um, go back to that moment. It's the very first time.
Oh,
And you're going to
yeah.
be that bareback racer. And in your mind, since you kind of pick up athleticism pretty easily, I'll tell you the people that I've met over the years, when they pick something up easily, they're usually highly competitive. So I just want to take you back for that first moment where you got on your first bareback horse, and this very different than being a bullfighter, because now you're right on top of the engine. So talk to me when you first sat on that very first horse. What was your thought?
Well, luckily, and I tell lots of people this, when I was bullfighting, like my nerves were always like quite high. Like my heart would just be pounding, and I'd kind of be a touch nervous, and even riding steers, I was always like that. But for whatever reason, when I would climb on a bucking horse, I never did get that feeling
Wow.
of like nervousness. I don't know. It was just something with me. I'd just get on and it was just like away we went. And I just, I had lots of help. Don't get me wrong. There was guys there giving you pointers. It was a practice. We would every Thursday we had practices in a small town in southern Alberta, and this is where I go back to that small group of guys that we, they would bring liner loads, like stock liner loads, like a big liner full of tryout horses. And here we are. We're really the crash test dummies getting on these horses. But the very first horse I got on, there's an old stock contractor. Well, he was old then and he's still alive. So I don't know. His name's Art Clausen.
So you never forget your first bareback
Oh,
experience.
yeah.
Go
And I'll
Art.
get your first love either, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And I remember I walked up to him, this sheepish kid that didn't know much what was going on. I said, "Hey, Art, this is my first bucking horse. Would you maybe have one in the back for me?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, there's an old sorrel back there. Jump on this one." And that friend of mine that I was telling you about that I got into rodeo with, well, he was a timed event guy, so he never had to be afraid. And I remember him telling me, he goes, "I think riding a bucking horse will feel just like a runaway. Like a horse is just running away." And sure enough, I got on this horse and I stay on. It goes around the arena. I stayed on my very first horse, make the pickup man get off. And then I'm like, oh man, that horse felt like he was just running away. Well, little did I know, he ran to the other end of the arena. He didn't really buck, but stayed on. And like from then on, it was just maybe that was the confidence or whatever a guy needed. But from then on, I just started craving that. And that adrenaline rush that you get getting on a bucking horse is, I can't find it ever since. Like there's nothing in this world that I can find that gives me that same feeling.
I have
It's
to understand. I had a grandfather who was an earbender, and for those that don't know, that's kind of breaking the horse into the corral and getting that feeling. I remember him telling me that there is no experience like it. It's being with the horses, and you clearly have a sense about the horse too. Just knowing that getting on it, you almost had this cathartic, like I'm where I'm exactly supposed to be.
yeah,
I'm happy here. Bullfighting, you got the anxiety, but bareback riding for you, that was it. You tasted it and you knew this is it. You won't find another adrenaline rush until you get on that horse. So good for you. All right.
yeah.
We're going to walk through some training because clearly many people need to know that this is truly a very, very difficult sport. And we'll talk about that in a little bit here. But I want to walk through, how did you prepare now that you got on your first horse, you got a taste of it and you're ready? I know you're competitive. You don't get to where you have been without really working hard. Tell me what you did in your training. And also, how did they prepare you mentally for some of the very difficult competitions that you were in?
Oh, so now we're going through 15 years of me being in sports and the ups and downs and the the good years and the bad years. How do I put this? So I was of the first generation. Rodeo for years was a bunch of guys just getting together, being old tough guys and riding bucking horses. But our generation kind of started. There started to be some more money added and some more competition, and we really started actually working out, and now the sport's gone really extreme where they got guys on meal plan. It's like any sport, right?
Right.
Hockey or football. Like how many guys back in the day probably sat in the dressing room and smoked cigarettes, and back in the 70s and 80s, and now, well, man, you I'm sure if you smoke you might not be on the team, kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So as an 18-year-old, 20-year-old, you were so active and coming out of high school and that, and in such good shape. Yeah, I didn't realize back then how much I had to work at it. And later on in my career, well, man, how much time do we have? Because
Oh,
I
we
could hear.
have lots of time.
Um, so
Our
let me.
our podcast listeners are in 101 countries, and they take the time when they're entertained to continue to listen. So continue, Matt.
Okay. So at 21, so I'd only been riding for 3 years. 2004, I didn't realize, and like all of a sudden things started clicking, and I started winning. And I go to Calgary Stampede this year. It's my first Calgary Stampede in the open professional level. I'd been there in the novice, and I remember it pretty distinctly because it was the first year that they ever paid 25,000 to win second. It always paid 50,000 for first, and they'd added more money. And anyways, I went there, and a few weeks prior, for whatever reason, like I just started finding this sweet spot on the bucking horses, and like I mean, I was on top of my game and on top of the world. And I roll into Calgary. I made the final four, and I drew this horse with Kessler's. And I remember we went out. I went out and probably I was trying to be 110 points, and ended up winning second. I really tried
Wow.
hard. So boom, there you go. That's my first big win. So that year, later on in the year, come September, I was winning. I was the season leader in Canada. This is '04. This is 20 years ago. Holy cow. I got on a horse in Armstrong, British Columbia, and I broke my leg quite bad. So this was my first injury, like ever, in really bad injury in rodeo. And so speaking of that, like, things, as I guess you say, came so naturally and things were just rolling. There was, holy cow, like I can just think of the mentally how hard that was on me. And then to come back from that, I just assumed like I just pick it up like I always did. And I struggled for a lot of years of not being at, and I couldn't even tell you, I possibly maybe never rode at that level again
Right.
as to where I was in '04. And then so the training, but learning that throughout the years, I even had a year where I didn't work at enough to where I didn't make the Canadian finals. And I'll tell you what, in the bareback riding, it was like, personally, I was like, if you can't make the Canadian finals in the bareback riding, I was just like, that's horrible. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so the year that I didn't make it, it was like an ultimate low in my career. I would say 100%. So I remember that year during the finals, I had started already at that time, not being there. I was in the gym, and I started boxing with a good friend of mine that had boxed for years. And over the account of and so this is progressing, sorry, to like 2011. So from 2004, when I broke my leg, I was out for a year and a half with multiple surgeries and that. Kind of rode and did okay, but wasn't really working at it right. So then 2011 comes along, and I don't make the finals. And it just, like I said, it drove me. I'm like, okay, I got to fix this. What am I doing wrong?
Right.
So, and that's where my mental game really started to pick up. I started boxing. I found a trainer from he was in Canada here. He was from France, and he had never watched me ride, yet could tell me everything that I was doing wrong just with my body.
Mm.
Like he'd see these little things, and I learned, first of all, I got in shape, like as good a shape as I've ever been. Then once you're boxing, like I give them boxers credit,
Oh,
and
for
then
sure.
fighters, like those guys are wickedly in shape. Everything, cardio, strength, like I have so much respect for them. And then add in the trainer to really help me prep my body to he showed me how to use the proper muscles to be as strong as you could possibly be. And then all of a sudden, this is where we get into the mental aspect. When you're in that good a shape and now you're that strong, like it just mentally is, I just became like tougher and tougher and better at what I did. And then so from missing the Canadian finals in 2011, I won my first Canadian championship in 2013. It was 2 years,
Wow. Good for
but
you. So
build.
just a quick question was, you're mentally strong, you're physically strong. you probably heard of Yogi Berra. I'm going to give you a Sherry Berry quote is, in order for people to be prosperous, they need two things. Prosperous means, number one, you need to have confidence in what you're doing, and you had to build that confidence back.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
as you get to that place where you have the confidence, your courage comes back. So prosperity equals confidence and courage. It sounded like you had the mix of this beautiful formula. But what truly, when you got on that horse, after knowing that you're strong, you're confident, tell me what it was that actually changed when you were on the horse, because the horse plays a big role.
100%. Like there's a I got to rodeo with the best bareback rider of all time, and his name's Casey Field. And he came in during our career and kind of changed the sport in my mind. And I would watch him, and he would almost control those horses with how he spurred. And I remember hearing him say one time, like, I try to pick that horse's feet up with my feet. So
Uh,
your theory is, in the bareback riding, you set your feet before before the horse's feet hit the ground. And then when he bucks, your feet like come up, and it really is a rhythm, right?
mhm.
But I just remember him saying that, and I really took that to heart. I'm just like, pick him up, and you could, like you say, with that confidence, then all of a sudden you were trying to essentially control a horse that you have no control of. But like using that mentally in my riding really helped. But like you said, you weren't going to do it if you were behind. You weren't going
Yeah.
to do it if you were a little bit weak, because like the timing of you had to be so precise that that horse just had to know, like, oh gosh, I can't get away. I'm just going to stand in one spot and buck. And there you go. A horse that stands in one spot and bucks, you're going to be way more points than one that, like that you
All
aren't,
around the
you're
ring.
chasing down the arena, even though you're on his back. And yeah, that is like getting, with age, you learn that. And that's getting like deeper and deeper into your career, where those things start to make sense. I see these young guys now getting on, they're slashing away, and they're going through the motions, but you can just tell that they're young.
Yes.
Their minds aren't mature. Where when Casey came into the world, he was like that right from the get-go. But
Oh,
he'd
the yoga. So the horse whisperer comes in. So Casey Field comes into your life. And this is kind of where the plot thickens because he's above the horse, meaning
oh
that
yeah.
his mind is fully 100% with the horse. He's not fighting the horse, he's working with the horse. I think
uh,
that's where a lot of cowboys go wrong in many sports is they think they can overpower or that it doesn't matter, but you have to recognize, embrace, and love that animal that you're with. And I think that's one of the biggest, brightest parts about watching an athlete like you is the athlete that adopts that sense of well-being with the horse, that balance that creates almost this beautiful salsa dance, if you will, is you watch someone who is a bareback rider who's got it, like Casey Fields, it's much more bigger than just an athletic sport. There is a fine harmony that happens both mentally and physically.
well, and with him gone in the sport now, I can watch it. I'm like, that, I personally don't see a guy out there that's like him. And I teach this, how you say that with harmony. I'm like, every horse I got on, and I learned this. I one of my best friends is a a cutting horse trainer here in Canada, a Hall of Famer, Dustin Gonnet. And I rode with him a lot, and he didn't teach me about this, but him and I had a lot of like deep conversations. And I mean, he's by far probably, I would say, the best cutting horse trainer to ever come out of Canada.
Mhm.
And getting to spend all that time. Well, the time I spent was with him was when I broke my leg, and that was what I did while I was healing, was started colts with him and
Mhm.
learned from it. Anyways, moving on from that, now when I teach my bareback riding schools, I tell them kids, you always introduce yourself to that horse. Like it's like anything. Like I would always go up, I'd pet that horse on the neck, and don't get me wrong, some of them horses don't want to be pet. They're
Yes.
they're not just a they're not just a fence and feed you kind of horse. But I'd always kind of pet them, and then not that I would necessarily talk to him, but I'd sit there and then in my mind I'm like, just you. And I tell these kids, you introduce yourself. That horse is going to work better for you if he's relaxed and they, I mean, them older horses in rodeo are, they know their job, they know exactly what's going on, but the younger ones, it is your job to make them the best that they can. So I introduced ourselves, but I always would say, like, once you start tightening your rigging, getting your saddle ready, or your rigging ready to ride, my mentality is not so friendly anymore. And then all of a sudden, when I'm sitting on that horse and then about to nod my head and call for the gate and into the arena we go, like now I'm like, all right, I'm gonna control you. Like I'm gonna tell you what to do, but it's in an aggressive way. It is, bareback riding is a lot like a boxing match. Like and you ask anybody in the rodeo world that hasn't rode bareback horses that tries them, like, it hurts. I'm like, it's just like boxing. It's like you're gonna get off and it's gonna feel like you got punched in the face like a boxer. Like, it's not gonna be great. But there's things that so it's like kind of taking the fight out there. Like I never thought of it as a fight, but maybe you did, but I just thought of it as you had to be so fast and aggressive to be in time with that horse. Things are going so that's unbelievable.
100%. I'm glad you brought up boxing because for those that are not familiar with the sport, they need to know how athletic you need to be. Bareback riding is at the top of the notch here. And there is bareback riding that typically through research accounts for 20% of all injuries in rodeo. Bull riding comes up to 50%. So you've already been in the ring with the bull, you get it. And then the
Yeah.
20% of injuries for bareback riding. Some of the recent research, however, actually indicates that the cowboys have blacked out from absorbing the excessive G forces when hitting the backs of their heads on their horses. It's a pretty big deal.
Well,
They call that the vestibular concussion. So share
yeah.
with me a little bit about that.
Oh man, like concussions is essentially what ended my career.
Hmm.
Um, but you think of all the power of a horse, and I wish you could see me, is running from your hand, and it comes out and it goes right out the top of your head. So you think of all that force because you're only hanging on by one arm.
That's right.
And now, having learned all the things that I've learned with the concussions, because I was told to take some time off, and it was at the end of my career, and that was, but I had seen the concussion specialist and everything. I can watch a bareback, riding now and be like, oh yeah, that guy's concussed. Like, and you weren't knocked out. It's like anything. You're right. It's the G forces,
Yeah.
and it's not always hitting your head on that horse's rump, which that happens lots, and that is a big thing in the bareback riding. But it's just the snapping of your chin because of all that pressure. Like, I wish I had some videos just to be able to show everybody, and you can watch it now. That horse kicks, guy's head, chin snaps, and that's always a big thing in rodeo. Keep your chin tucked. Well, it's true. Like, it's hard to do, but
It's
it's so many G forces. I can't.
so let me go back. I always give my listeners homework, and I'm going to highly encourage that you do look at a bareback rider on video. And YouTube will be there'll be plenty of fast moving bareback rodeo competitions that you can look at. But the one piece is that the G forces are real. And there was a doctor that was out of NASA. His name's Dr. Jennings. He actually evaluates astronauts, and he wanted to know more about the physical demands of bareback and bull riders. So they were compared to aerobatic pilots and astronauts in his study. And the study was about trying to learn more about how much G force so they could prevent injuries. Now, here's the astonishing findings, is that bareback riders pulled up to 46 Gs. Bull riders came out with 26 Gs. Okay, so I want you to absorb that fact because I'm going to ask you something really technical here in a moment. It's worth noting that that G load that your bareback riders that you're currently teaching is the same as a 200 mile per hour Indy car crash, which is about 50 Gs. And you talked about boxing. Well, a boxing knockout punch is 58 Gs. So it makes sense when you say boxers are taking a whole lot of force, so they better be strong. But also, 50% of the injuries are found in bull riding, yet the bull riders that get a lot of pomp and circumstance, they're not taking the same amount of Gs. It's actually the bareback riders that are taking the largest amount of Gs. So from 46 to the bull riders at 26. So I found that kind of a fascinating and interesting statistic. So what do you think actually is the reason why bull riders get hurt almost twice as much as a bareback rider?
Oh, well, I'm going to go back.
Okay.
Well, this is kind of funny, and I just thought of this. One year we were in Houston at the rodeo, and we had a guy trying to test G forces on us. So he come up to me and he's like, "Hey, can I put these things in your ears during your ride? We're gonna tape them on, and then it's this thing, and they're trying to measure G forces." I'm like, "Sure." So I did this, and these things on my ears, by the time I'm done, they fell out. Like you couldn't even keep them on my head.
Yeah.
Like,
I could see
so,
that. It's
like,
huge.
I
It's
wonder how that.
huge.
Yeah, but I've been around rodeo a lot. I think bull riders, a lot of times you got to remember our injuries were only on top of the horse while you're
Mhm.
riding. Bull riders, a lot of their injuries, like they even come like a bull rider will get bucked off, and then that bull's still spinning, and they'll get stepped on, and like so
Um,
there's like a lot. I would like to say a lot of injuries, like they didn't have just 8 seconds. They had say 16 seconds of time where that bull might step on you, that bull might run you over. And don't get me wrong, I've seen some bad bareback riding accidents, but I've never seen stuff like when a bull rider comes from the flank and then hits heads with a
oof.
bull like that. That to me is the worst injury that can happen. And if you look at all the worst injuries in rodeo, it usually is a bull rider coming from the back seat, connecting with heads on that bull, and
Gotcha.
like that. I don't know what that force be. And it's one of them sounds that isn't good.
Okay,
Like,
so curiosity, since you've been a bullfighter, did you ever get tagged by the bull and or did the your bareback experience, did you ever have contact after you hit the ground with the horse?
yeah, like it's like any sport, or both sports are dangerous. So yeah, in the bull fighting, you obviously got hit, but it wasn't like a bull might hit you with his head and then like fling you up and out in the air, or run the length of you. Like, so yeah, you did that. Obviously was a thing. But in the bareback riding, uh, your hangups in the bareback riding are bad. I mean, your hand is strapped into the rig, and there's a part where you fall off that you can't get your hand out unless you go off the other side. So
Oh,
that was a huge thing in my career, is making sure, I rode, I don't know how many bucking horses, but had only been hung up 3 times in my career. So that's a huge thing I teach, is safety to them kids. I'm like, you got a safe spot. It's out, whatever, depending on what hand you ride with in the bareback riding. I'm like, it's out that side or out this side, like that's your safe spot. But
I I find it I'm almost ironic that you're teaching safety on getting on a bareback,
let's call
but good for
it
you.
survival. Yeah.
Thank you. Survival is a better term, but I really do love it. And some are very familiar with the 8 seconds on a bull, but talk about the actual, like for those that may have never seen bareback riding, tell what is the number one thing that the bareback rider needs to do to win, and share a little bit about the sport for someone who knows nothing about bareback riding, because 8 seconds on a bull, we all know it's 8 seconds. We see that everybody's introduced to the 8 seconds of terror. But what about bareback riding? Share the sport itself with us.
Well, I always said the bull riders were lucky because they just had to stay on. Like,
This
oh
is
yeah,
true.
and I tell those guys, you just got to keep your hand closed for 8 seconds and stay on. Like our event is marked on your style, so you have to actually find your timing with the horse, be in time, and it's a spurring motion, right? Like, and it. So if I was just to stay on a bareback horse, I would definitely not have won. And that's I would always bug my bull riding friends that way. All you got to do is stay on. It's not that
Oh, the
where
plot thickens now when we talk to bull riders.
where like yeah in the bareback riding it's I think a number one thing that I would always think of riding is like you needed to pick up that timing instantly, so you had to be in time with that horse, and every horse feels different. It's like people, everybody acts different, and so you'd get to know we obviously knew the horses, especially in the professional ranks. For the most part, I'd say 85-95% of the horses had been around,
Right.
and maybe you'd been on that horse previously. You're like, holy cow, that horse is really strong. So when
Yeah.
I'd call a horse strong, it means like his force on your arm is like hard. Or you're like, oh, that horse, we call him a hopper. So a hopper would mean like that horse would hardly pull on your arm. It was like a lot easier to find your timing and things like that. But I think to succeed in the bareback riding, timing is just a massive, and it has to be from the word go. So you nod your head, that horse's front feet hit the ground, you have to try and find your timing. So man, anybody that's been out there riding, anybody that's rode a horse knows that even when a horse is trotting or loping, it there's horses sometimes that you're like, oh man, this horse is nice and smooth, and I can
Yeah.
find my time with him. Or there's ones that you're like, oh, this sucker's rough and hard to ride. I'm like, the bareback riding was no different. So I like, and people you watch these horses, you're like, oh, that horse bucks good, and I can watch a horse now. I'm like, oh, he would feel horrible.
Yeah.
Like that's a lot of work, or
So once you nod your head, how much time do you have to show your style?
8 seconds. It's the same.
Okay, so
It's
it's the same
every
8 seconds.
every rough stock event in rodeo is 8 seconds. Yeah.
Do you have
And
any thought on why they made it 8 seconds? Is that
well,
like,
years ago it was 10. It was 10 that
okay,
like many years ago. And then for whatever, I couldn't tell you why, but they changed it to 8. There's
got it.
some days I wish it was 6. Some days you would,
Yeah. The
and
8 seconds where you and I just blink our eyes is 8 seconds, right? But you're strapped down to a massive animal, whether you're bull riding or bareback, and those are the longest 8 seconds of anyone's life.
yeah. Well, I wouldn't call them the longest. It's still only 8 seconds, right? Like, but
Oh,
there's
that's because you love the
there was a
sport, you
bareback
see?
or a bronc rider one time. His name was Teos Muncie, and he was world champion. And I remember me, and he was telling this kid, I can't remember where we were, and he's like, "What are you so scared for? It's only 8 seconds." Like, but
I
you could be
love
scared.
I That's it. I love the fact that you're training the next generation of rodeo athletes. And I also think that the youth have a better perspective on what health looks like. Because, like you said, in the good old days, they'd smoke a pack of cigarettes, drink a bottle of whiskey, and away we go, right? Now,
Yeah,
the true professionals, they get it. They know how hard it is. They know how long they need to be training for that next high level event. They also know what muscles and strength training needs to be done and where your weakness is. And I think that's where the balance of the horse and the rider come in is, one thing about chiropractic care, and you know this better than the majority of bareback riders out there, because once you break your leg, balance and you never forget it.
yeah.
But what would you say to the youth about looking at their wellness, perhaps chiropractic, and how did it fit into your world?
Yeah. Well, now, oh, so we're going to get into this side of life. Um, the beginning of my chiropractic career wasn't because of the rodeo arena. It was because of I'm going to label it as a horrific go-karting accident. But
It's the other terror that you were on.
just shenanigan rodeo stuff. So we had a rodeo that you'd go to every May long weekend in Cloverdale, British Columbia. It's out by Vancouver. It's on the west coast. And so you'd have to, usually everybody would jump in. The rough stock guys, you'd all kind of pile in. You'd get 4 or 5 guys in every truck, and you'd all head out to the west coast for the weekend. Well, a little town called Sycamoose along the way had what I would call the funnest go-karts you've ever had. And of course, you got to remember, we're all early, mid, late 20s people. Like, what's more fun than just driving a bunch of go-karts? And I was trying to think of, like, I don't even think they had rules on these go-karts. Like, they're these old kind of metal frame go-karts, and they weren't super fast. Well, you get a bunch of cowboys on there, and here we are trying to cop turn each other, and you're out in the boonies driving your go-karts, trying to push guys off the track, and it was like a demolition derby in go-karts. And there was a bunch of us there the one day, and I was coming around the corner, and the Devin Maisie, a bull rider of all people, he cop turns me, and then I hit the dirt and flipped my go-kart.
Oh dear.
Well, and there's a little bit of a headache kind of rack on the back, but I was tall enough that I was over top of the headache rack, so landed on my head. And I remember I was sitting upside down, and another bull rider come over and clicked my seatbelt, and I tumbled to the ground. Well, I immediately got up, and I'm like, oh, this isn't good. So I pushed my cart into the safe zone and went and laid in the camper. Luckily, the rodeo, we were on our way home, but that was the very beginning where I needed to go see a chiropractor.
I can't even imagine that there's a bareback rider and he gets hit with a golf. Okay, it's almost musical because you're on one of the most dangerous sports in the world, and you get hurt go-karting. So what happened in that experience? Like, how did you even know that you needed to go to a chiropractor, and what did you realize then that kind of kept chiropractic in your wellness program throughout? Because I know it wasn't just one and done. It was like, this is so many of the cowboys absolutely they demand chiropractic. It's not, hey, is it possibly available? It's like, no, I need my chiropractor, and they love their chiropractor. It is a full on, if they're not there, I don't feel good kind of experience.
I had a standing appointment with Dr. Bug, I think, every week after that.
Aha.
But long enough then that my body was still good. Yeah, I would like to say. And then obviously it was in between my shoulder blades where it was the worst. I was locked up, and Bug fixed me up. But then as your rodeo career went on, it's like any job. Like, you can have a job as a banker, and after a year of typing on the computer, whatever, after 2 years typing on the computer, you're like, oh, I could massage my arms.
Hmm.
But after 5 years, a person that types on the computer, your wrists are sore. Like, so think of the bareback riding. Like, I had to say that I was in my mid 20s, and now, like, just the continuous force was starting to catch up with your body. And
Sure.
that's when we say, like, you had to start taking care of your body even that much more. And for me, I can tell you, like, obviously, I would like to say my hips, probably because of my broken leg,
Right.
started to have like slight rotation, and obviously my lower back was starting to become a bit of an issue. And I would say that was generally because of the broken leg and hopping around on one leg for a year. Like, that doesn't help your posture at all.
No.
But, like, for me, I would get a lot of ribs out. I was starting to get ribs out, like, and that's just, and maybe that's probably no medical term. And people, I don't know, that was just my layman's term. I could tell immediately. I'm like, holy cow! Like, you want to be uncomfortable, try having that rib between your shoulder blades, and like,
Oh,
you think force on this one arm coming down, it just is pulling. We're not doing everything in with both sides of our body. Like, your one arm and that side of your body was taking so much force. You were just talking about the forces that, yeah, I had to, like I said, Dr. Bug, it was a weekly thing. And if I hopefully seen him on the weekends, I'd get him to adjust me then. And like, that maintenance side of it was huge.
it is.
And
But let me go back and just ask you a question because some of the listeners today have never seen a chiropractor.
yeah.
This podcast was shared with them, and they're like, I just want to listen to what the bareback rider story is. How did you actually know to go to a chiropractor? Because many of us, like myself, I ended up going to a medical doctor and I was prescribed painkillers, and I just thought that was going to fix it. So how did you actually know to go to a chiropractor?
Well, we were so fortunate here. Well, there's going to be people that that aren't going to like this, but I myself am not a fan of doctors, like straight up doctors. Like, we, uh, I go to the doctor if I'm going to die. That's pretty much me, right? Like, but I will say we were so fortunate in Canada that we have a Canadian sports medicine team.
Mhm.
And right from, pretty much the inception of me riding bareback horses and that, it was comprised of a chiropractor, and like, what do you call them, techs, the ATs,
Oh yeah, the athletic trainers. And
and
I
massage.
believe
And
you also have an emergency physician on in case, of course, things start to bleed or go out of control.
well, obviously at every rodeo, it's a requirement to have an ambulance, and it wasn't
Yeah.
always a doctor. And so this is the difference in the United States. They would always have a doctor on their sports medicine team, but not necessarily the chiropractor and the massage when I was rookie. And maybe it's changed now. I've been out of it now for a while.
Right.
But that's where I love Canada is we had the athletic therapist, the massage, and the chiropractor. Those were our three people
That's a
when the sports
beautiful team. That's
were
such a
there.
beautiful team for you. So that kind of brought you into, I need my body to be fixed. And that team approach probably was eye-opening for you, is,
Oh,
each one plays a vital role, and together it's the sum of all the parts makes it a beautiful piece.
they're a huge part of why I'm still healthy now. Like, just being, I learned so much for them. And I feel like those, would you call them holistic medicine? I don't even know
Mhm.
if you call it holistic, but like, they would just look at your whole, they're not there to prescribe a pill to make you feel better. Like, they actually were like, oh, you hurt here, well, this is connected to here and here. Oh, does this hurt here? And you drop me to my knees, like,
That's right. The whole being approach, right? We're looking at you
yeah.
as a whole and not like the injury or the symptom. It because
And
you saw that with your leg being broken. It's like, okay, it's rotating my hips a little bit and my posture. And you're right. There was a asymmetry with your hand being stuck in one
yeah,
position, and the abuse and overuse and
yeah,
sometimes misuse of how the horse treated you is a whole
yeah.
different thing. And it's kind of a beautiful thing, especially when you find out not only does the cowboy need chiropractic, but after speaking to Dr. Bug, who is a chiropractor in Canada, he noted that the animals are so well treated as well. Was that your experience?
Yeah, and Bug himself, as a human chiropractor, I would know he works on lots of animals. You can't get him on Fridays because I think he takes that day of the week to work on animals. and
What a
and that
beautiful thing.
oh, it's become, in the sports world, very, people have started to use the holistic approach a lot on animals in animal, equine and sports.
I think it
Just,
makes your sport that much better because now, when you had those horses that maybe were the hoppers, they became a little more aggressive and became a better ride because the body is in tune and in better balance. I think it's a beautiful thing.
yeah, it's pretty cool. But like honestly for myself, I can only speak of my everything that they had done for me in my career, and I it's like any sport, it takes a team, and there's lots of individual sports out there, tennis, golf, and I guarantee you anybody in any of those sports still says, let everybody know, like, yeah, it there's a lot of people that it took to keep me healthy and things like
Sure. Team
I
approach.
I always like to try to use. I mean, we were so fortunate that the sports medicine at a rodeo was free, gratis. Like, so you could just walk up, hey, this is what's going on. They'd work on you. And I really tried when I was rodeoing to use those people outside of the arena as well, like support their business, because
Yeah.
those people back then, if they weren't volunteering, they definitely weren't making as much money as they could if they were at home.
A hundred
So
percent.
they were there because they cared about us, and we got to know those people very well. There was a gal. I'm not gonna name her names, but her name, but everybody will know. She's a blonde gal, always had long hair and braids, and I think she loved making us cowboys cry. She was a massage therapist, and she could like
Her hands are tougher than half those
oh
horses.
yeah.
I think it's awesome. Now, speaking of the long-haired braided girl that was massage therapist, I have rumor that your wife is an accomplished barrel racer and horse trainer as well. So let's end with this. This is an entire family of epic professional athletes. And I know you have children. So at this point in both your lives, being that you're now a coach, someone who really sees the sport for its evolution and where it's been and where it's going, and your wife clearly an athlete as well. How does the entire family see wellness and being active in sports as part of your own beauty of wellness care?
It's not totally, if you really want to get into it, it's not totally just wellness and care. It's just the support that it takes the like of your family to understand what it takes in any sport or anything in your life, your job or anything, to truly be a successful person. Like, that person almost has, not only do they have to support you, they sometimes got to push you out the door on days maybe that you don't want
Oh,
to. And like, I try to hope, I hope to think that I could be the same. Like, obviously my wife rides now, and I'd like to hope that I can be as supportive to her as she was to me. By like, there was days where I'd be mad and she'd be, mad at her for being hard on me for maybe not working out or something. But when you really thought of it at the end, like, she was that driving factor behind you of like, no, this is how you make your living. You get out the door, you go do that, but work hard here. And you hope now, once you get kids, that you can just be that person that they look up to, and just, it's like anything, learn to do by doing. So you hope that now that you have kids, you can show them like, hey, we work hard, we practice perfection, and we try to succeed in life. Don't get me wrong, you're not always going to succeed, but if you can, have that support group, it's easier to do that. So
what a beautiful way to end this segment with you, Matt. Is there's a famous quote by Mother Teresa that says, if you want to change the world, go home and hug your family. And
yeah.
I think that's what keeps us all in the circle of love. And I can tell you there's no greater community that I've been involved with in my life than being in that rodeo community. It's good, it's heartfelt, it's an honest, true, loving, let's everybody come to the table and enjoy each other and support each other. And, when you're in a place where it could be a very serious injury, you need that support. And so, Matt, I can't thank you enough for sharing your experience, your talent, and your wisdom with us today. And I look forward to being able to meet you in person very soon. So we'll be looking forward to that. And I just want to say to all of the listeners today, it really does come down to the support that you have around you that will make you the better person that you are. If you can be the support for someone else, it'll strengthen our world and our community community. So thank you so much, Matt, for being on the Adjusted Reality podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
I want to thank you for tuning in to Adjusted Reality as we spoke to Matt Lait about the physical and mental adversities of bareback riding. Now, this podcast was brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress. And as a special gift for listening, you can visit f4cp.org/health to get a copy of Chiropractic Care, a natural approach to health at every stage of life ebook. Now, don't forget to subscribe. Share this podcast with family and friends. Rate and review. They may never have heard of bareback riding, but now they do, thanks to you. And of course, if you're feeling so inspired or you had like a go-kart accident like Matt, you can learn more about chiropractic or find a doctor of chiropractic near you. You can visit f4cp.org/find-a-doctor. We always appreciate support, and we sincerely look forward to checking in with you again soon.